the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Kayla, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Hey, I'm really excited about having you here. I want you to kind of share with the audience who you are and what brought you to doing what you're doing.
I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I specialize in relationships, in trauma. I'm also a trauma trained therapist, and I really love to combine the two and help with relational trauma, whether that's trauma that happens inside the relationship, so infidelity, history of some kind of abuse, anything like that, in addition to traumas that people experienced outside of the relationship, but the kind of the damage is kind of impacting the relationship today. So we can kind of help with that as well. I became a therapist just because I've had my own fair share of therapy, and I've had some incredible life-changing therapists and had some not so great therapists. And I really thought, it kind of just spoke to me, and I thought, hey, I can do this. I think I've got enough client experience to a pretty good idea of what works and what doesn't. And then about four or 5 years ago, I started specializing in couples. I was given a couple to work with at a group practice, and I had no experience, and it turned out really great. And the couple they were felt like they were on the brink of separation, and they ended up doing great, and now they're happy years later. And so it was really inspiring. And so I wanted to learn more, and I just kind of fell in love with the couples work.
Oh, that's great. And you're located in Denver, right?
Denver, Colorado. Yep.
So here's the big question. Why do you want to be on a podcast?
Well, I really love to share, some tools. Therapy is not accessible for everyone, unfortunately. And so I think people can work on their relationship without therapy. And there's some kind of general tools that I can offer that are relatively simple that can really make a big impact. And so I'm really passionate about sharing that, again, for people that either don't want to go to therapy or they just don't have the resources or time to go to therapy.
Okay. And you only work in the Denver area, right? Colorado. So it's not like you do Zoom meetings with people outside of the state of Colorado. Is that a fair assumption?
So I only do therapy. I only do trauma therapy in Colorado. I can offer relational coaching, which would not include any kind of trauma work, but just kind of skill building tools, that kind of stuff. I can offer that to anyone outside of the state of Colorado as well.
Oh, okay, good. So here's my question, and you kind of mentioned it. You've been through some therapy, and I've interviewed a tremendous amount of people who are, quote, coaches, and I hate that word, but most of the ones that I've interviewed are really good at helping people through some of that difficulty, subconscious problems, and so forth. And then you have your therapists, and as you said, there's some good ones, and there's not some good ones. And I'd love for you to kind of share with the audience, based on your point of view, your opinion, at what point in time, because as you say, you can be a coach or a therapist to people outside of the state, so you're not licensed to do that, and yet you're very well trained to do that, as other people are that may not be a licensed therapist per se. So as you look at that, and just from your experience, at what point in time and where are the issues that, for instance, we can work with you on this. For this, you probably need to talk to someone who's a little bit more experienced. For this, you really need a licensed therapist. And You don't need talk therapy. You need actually someone that's going to get to the root cause of what's going on. So, what's your thoughts on that? Where do people need to go based on what they're experiencing? As you say, many of them attempt and very successfully sometimes are able to do some of their own personal therapy.
Mhm. Yeah, so I believe that therapy kind of coaching this profession, this line of work, a lot of people, the schooling is definitely important, and that gives us some, the tools and the legalities, the ethics, that kind of stuff. But I think sometimes people just have like they have that connection. So much of therapy, the number one predictor of therapeutic success is the relationship people have with their therapist or coach or anything like that. I think that that's kind of paramount, right? Just being able to connect with people, listen, having those skills, those communication skills. Of course, some kind of training, whether it is, like I said, through school or through, I'm trained in a couple different types of modalities, like highly trained in those. A lot of that's really important because people are trusting us with their relationships, you know what I mean? And so I think that that's so important to be respectful and mindful of how important it is to really develop these skills and tools. Um, so I think whatever more important is kind of connecting with whoever you're working with. Of course, also talking to them about their process and what that looks like and see if it resonates with you. Um, However, if there's any kind of trauma work that needs to be done, I would definitely recommend a licensed professional in that. Not only licensed, but also having some specialty training in trauma. Trauma can be risky to work with. There is a risk of re-traumatizing people. And so it's definitely important to have that special training when it comes to that. So your therapist would be able to kind of help you through any kind of situations when you're processing trauma.
Okay, and I appreciate you saying that because that was what I wanted the audience to really understand is that there's a level of trauma. I mean, we all experience trauma to some degree, but when you get to a certain level of trauma, you really need someone who's licensed, who has some of the modalities that I know you use that are extremely effective, but you have to be highly trained in that. So, as you mentioned couple therapy, and we'll get into a lot of things, but as we mentioned couple therapy, obviously there's a lot of reasons why couples start to have challenges. My question for you is how much or what percentage of people that you see that are struggling actually are experiencing many of those challenges because of those deep-seated trauma at whatever level, but they're experiencing that subconscious trauma, that subconscious belief system, whatever that happens to be. And literally, they are experiencing now difficulty in their relationship because of that.
Almost all of them, if not all.
Okay.
And I mean, I spend a lot of time sharing with people that it's never about the surface. It's never about what it seems to be about. There's also the conflict, whatever's going on. There's always a deeper meaning, and that oftentimes almost always comes from childhood. Occasionally, it just comes from big traumas that they've experienced through their lives. But even that is usually just reinforcing these beliefs that we develop as infants. And so I do a lot of work with attachment styles, and attachment styles boil down to there's kind of core wounds with insecure attachment styles, and those are formed in infancy. And so somebody with an anxious attachment like myself, the deeper meaning, those core issues related to that are fear of rejection and abandonment. So for me, in my experience, and most people with an anxious attachment almost all the conflict, if you really, really boil it down, it's going to be something to do with rejection or abandonment or something like that. Somebody else with, for example, an avoidant attachment could have the exact same experience as me. And the core wounds with avoidant attachment are fear of failure and fear of worthlessness. So both of us could have the exact same experience. I'm going to come out of it feeling rejected. Somebody with an avoidant attachment is going to come out of it feeling like they failed or they're worthless. And so that's kind of, that shows up with everyone with however their attachment styles, those deeper or those core beliefs that they've created, they develop throughout their lives. That's what everything kind of comes back to. And that's what needs to be acknowledged and addressed when you're working on communication. It's not just focusing on saying things differently and that kind of stuff. You've got to be able to communicate that deeper piece. That really made me feel rejected, or that really made me feel like I've failed you.
Well, and that's interesting you say that. I am a licensed, certified at least behavioral analyst, and so I use a very specific behavioral questionnaire. And one of the things that I found, and it's called the DISC, but it's much deeper than just the standard DISC test, if you've heard of that. But what I have found is that attachment falls within the right brain introvert area of a personality, whereas the other one's probably more left brain extrovert type of thing. And so how do you help people to understand what their attachment process is? Because I know how I do it, but I don't know how you do it.
Yeah, so usually I just, kind of say, tell me about a recent conflict you've had, or tell me about a time that you've been hurt by your partner. And I just kind of walk them through it. And a question I ask a lot of people is, when your partner did that, what does that mean about you? And so that a lot of times they'll say, well, it means that, that I'm not, they don't always use the words failing, but it means that I'm not getting it right. It means that I keep messing things up, something like that. Well, that sounds like fear of failure to me. That sounds like an avoidant
Mhm.
attachment, right? And sometimes I kind of work backwards. What is your response? Like, how did you respond in that conflict? And if it's, well, I really felt I wanted to solve it right away. I couldn't let it go. I kept thinking about it. I really wanted to talk about it and repair. Well, then I've got an idea that that's probably an anxious attachment. And so then we kind of worked that way. And well, you wanted to solve it so quickly because it felt like you were being abandoned, right? And so you needed that repair to not feel like that. Or if somebody says, I tend to shut down, well, that sounds like there's some shame there and you felt like you've really messed up or done something. That sounds like an avoidant attachment.
Okay, so as you get, and now you're really focusing on relationships, as you get these couples coming in to see you, and most of the time is it couples or once in a while an individual, and then you've got to drag the other side in.
I try to always start with the couple first, before the opposite, just so I don't develop any kind of bias or anything like that. But I do sometimes work with couples, and occasionally I work with those one or both members of the couple individually as well, and to kind of maybe work on some things that are out, like not completely relational, but still impacting the relationship. So sometimes I do that, but generally I try to do as much work as I can in the presence of both partners. So in couple sessions, I find that most
And
critical.
how do you maintain the aspect of not taking favoritism towards one of the individuals? Because
So
that happens a lot.
yeah, I don't take favoritism. However, the way that I'm trained in relational life therapy. It's different than more of the traditional types of therapy. And part of relational life therapy is we don't have the perspective that everything's 50-50, right? Uh, it's a dynamic. So there's contributions from both sides. But sometimes somebody's behavior is far more egregious, and it's really, really impacting the relationship. And I'm very direct, and the way that I'm trained is to kind of call that out and say, hey, this is not helping. This is what it's doing to your relationship, and help the other partner, communicate that what their experience is like in the relationship. But definitely not favoritism, but I do sometimes not all issues are completely balanced 50-50. And we are trained in school that is how you work in couples therapy. But sometimes, I feel like that really misses some really good opportunities to point out, like, hey, this is really, really making a significant impact in your relationship. And like this has to change if you want your relationship to change. So I really appreciate that directness and kind of not tiptoeing around sometimes the reality of the situation.
Yeah. So I'm saying to you, he's doing this, he's doing that to me, he's doing that to me, so it's all on him. How often do you look at that and go, no, actually, it's probably all on you?
A lot. A lot of times it's very often people come into couples therapy with the expectation that I'm going to tell their partner that everything they're doing is wrong. But I never take one party's word for it. First, I get, both. I always check in, like, do you agree that that was what was happening? And we kind of break it down. I don't stay on the surface. So we get deeper and really see what's going on, what are the impacts. But yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon that people are just not recognizing their contribution. And sometimes, like I said, a lot of times when people do come in with the expectation I'm going to tell their partner everything that they're doing is wrong, that a lot of times that is the opposite in those instances.
So as you experience this, and I know trying to develop percentage is tough, but what percentage as they come in, what are the major issues? I know certainly infidelity is one of them. Abuse obviously is another one that I would think would be more difficult to handle. But what are the main elements of challenges within a couple's relationship that you have observed as they come in to see you for help?
Again, I mean, every single couple will say communication is what they need help on, which is, and that is kind of the basis for a lot of things. If you can develop those communication tools, you can handle most of the situations because you'll develop the ability to have difficult conversations and resolve conflict and those kinds of things. Like I said, though, it's not just active listening and I statements and all of those things. Those are helpful, but that's not going to repair communication. So I think that is being able to get down to those deeper core wounds, those traumas that are impacting the relationship. And so that's more of how you improve communication. So it's really addressing those core wounds and how are you operating? Are you shutting down? Are you kind of suffocating your partner? And it's really hard to change those behaviors. So I try to give people tools to just do that in a more responsible, non-harmful way. So if you need to, instead of shutting down, maybe taking space in a responsible way, something like that. So that piece, but also there's a lot of resentments, like long-standing resentments. So people that haven't had these tools for part of or all of their relationship. I mean, I often work with couples that have been married 30, 40 years. And if they haven't had these tools, that's a lot of resentment that's built up, so that we've really got to repair that in order for them to move forward and be happy in their relationship and be able to even use healthy communication tools without healing the resentments. When conflict comes up, it's those resentments are going to keep kind of getting in the middle of whatever it's going to be deflecting from what the actual situation is at that time. So if you don't take care of the resentments, they're going to keep coming in and kind of messing with all the progress they're trying to make.
Well, and what I hear you talking about is emotions and really being able to recognize emotions. The other thing you mentioned that you didn't mention specifically is type of personality. And the reason I bring that up, I smile because you said, some people just have to shut the door and go away. I'm one of those. If I get into a discussion, it's like, all right, if I really get upset, I need a couple of days just to settle this down and then let's talk. Whereas other people, no, right away, right away, right away. So how do you help those couples to understand that they have different personalities? In fact, in most cases, what I've found is opposites attract. So they're usually not the same personality. And ultimately, someone who happens to be very right brain, loves to talk, loves to be around people, wants to get things settled, is married a left brain individual who just, quit talking so much, just get to the point. And if I get upset, just give me some time. So how do you help people to really understand each other's personalities on that?
Yeah, so a lot of that is attachment style. And so the way I would kind of determine whether it's personality or attachment style would be, do you have the capability, even though it feels better for you to take some time, that's okay. Are you able to engage in that conflict without taking that break if needed, versus somebody with that attachment style? They're going to be completely dysregulated. They're going to really, really struggle with being able to stay present during that. So in either case, it's valid that if you do need some space or if you need to connect or anything like that. But if it is more of an attachment style thing, then like I said, how can you, if you really tend to shut down or you get completely dysregulated, like maybe ask your partner or communicate to them, hey, I need a break. I'm going to come back in 2 hours. I'm just going to take some time and kind of chill out and cool off. And then I'll come back and we can talk about this. And then you need to actually do that to develop that confidence in your partner that you'll do that. If you are someone who needs to kind of resolve it in that moment, again, just trying to communicate with your partner, and sometimes collaborate on how can you get that need met in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming to your partner. And you're right. So anxious and avoidant attachment styles are opposite, and that is, I call them complementary. And actually, if you can develop the tools and resources that can be it usually is other than secure and secured, the most successful relationship pairing. And so I try to help couples and give them a little hope that you guys can use these, because if both of you are shutting down when there's conflict, that's going to be really difficult because nobody's going to want to talk about anything. And if both of you need to resolve immediately, that can sometimes be like an explosion and so overwhelming. And so the anxious and avoidant can really balance each other out. You just have to develop ways to do that without harming your partner or the relationship.
So as couples are not quite at the point of coming to see you yet, but they're really struggling, what would you advise to them as far as recognizing emotions? Because emotions bring about behavior. And when I was getting certified in this area, the fellow that was working with us made an interesting comment. It was a joke. He says, "All right, here's something you really should be able to say, but you better not, or you're in deep trouble." And he says, if you're in an argument with your spouse, it would be nice to say, what emotion just came up for you that caused you to feel this way? He says, and you're going to get in deep trouble. But if you reverse that and take the responsibility to say, you know what, when you did that, this is the emotion that came up in me. And all of a sudden, instead of me blaming you for what I'm experiencing, I'm taking responsibility for myself and going, wow, I just got triggered, but what caused the trigger? And then being able to, obviously get some help in going back and figuring out what caused the trigger for me to react in that way. And it really has to do with emotions. How do you help people to gain the responsibility and the courage to actually look at those triggers, those emotions, and recognize that their behavior is a result of those triggers and emotions?
Yeah, I think that's a a critical piece is being able to communicate that. I love feelings lists, feelings wheels. Otherwise, the feelings are going to be usually good, bad, mad, those kinds of things, and that doesn't give you much information. But a lot of times, I'll give people a feelings list, and I'll say take the anger category out. Like you're not allowed to give one of the anger feelings because that's almost always covering up something more vulnerable. Um, and so communicating that it and oftentimes I'll ask people, okay, you're feeling disappointed, put that into words, right? Put that feeling into words so your partner can really understand what that's like for you. Also, it's really important to, like you said, own how you're feeling. And feelings are real, they're valid, real, no matter what, but they're also not facts. So keeping that in mind, that I can feel rejected from my partner and by my partner, and that's real and that's valid. And it's not necessarily a fact that he did reject me. And so I need to be aware of that. And that's where the relationality comes into play, right? If both of you can understand that my feeling is real, my feeling is valid, and it's not a fact. And so your partner also hopefully can connect with that so they don't get defensive, right? And they can validate, even though they don't agree, but they can look at, okay, I hear that you're feeling rejected in this moment. That's probably got to be really hard. Maybe, you're probably feeling lonely, maybe confused, that kind of stuff. So the more information that you could give your partner, the better. Also staying aware that it's not their responsibility to identify that. Like I said, I do relational life therapy. So the relational way to do that is sometimes you're going to be at your best and sometimes you're not going to be. And so in a really healthy relationship, sometimes your partner, and this has to happen on both ends, but sometimes your partner can support you in that, like, hey, what's going on here? Can you help me understand how you're feeling? Maybe they bring out a list, or maybe they say, say more about that, and they can kind of help you come up with that. Sometimes, but for the majority of the time, yeah, you've got to really understand. And even if, again, like if you do go to anger, what would that put the anger into words? Usually when you do that, you're going to get the more vulnerable emotion. So I think that that's really important, taking the anger piece out and getting to vulnerable, because anger, that pushes your partner away. And vulnerability, all the other emotions other than any form of anger, frustration, that kind of stuff, that'll typically bring your partner closer. That'll evoke some empathy. But if you're just saying, I'm so mad at you, a lot of times people aren't going to be like, very respond in that in a very positive way. But if you say, that was really hurtful to me, or I really felt rejected in that moment, I understand that that's not necessarily was your intent. You weren't rejecting me, and this is still how I'm feeling. So being aware of that, and also being able to communicate without the anger piece, I think is just critical.
Well, and as you talk about that, I mean, what comes to my mind is each individual has so much work to do on their own, because how on earth can you get to the point of communication where you can say, hey, honey, I understand where you're going with that. I want you to know that's not my intent, and that was not what I was intending, but I understand that. And I'm sorry that that's how it came across. But to be able to do that, you've got to have that self-image up at a high level. You've got to have that self-love at a level, and that communication skill at a level that you can move your ego aside and really listen and seek
Hmm.
to understand and not judge. So one of the questions that I know that you had mentioned in your bio, and I think it's an interesting one, and just spend a little bit of time on it. I think one of the most difficult things, I would imagine, one of the most difficult areas is when there's been infidelity. How on earth do you help people to heal from infidelity?
Hmm. Yeah, I am trained in infidelity recovery too. So that is, like you said, a huge relational trauma. And so a huge part of my work is infidelity therapy. I'm trained in, it's called systematic affair recovery therapy. Um, and it's very often it is repairable. A lot of people do not, they come in pretty hopeless with that they're going to be able to get to repair, but it is possible for a lot of situations. The way that I go through that, through the way that I'm trained, it's a very structured process, and how we go through each individual's history, like a family of origin history. Then we go into each individual's relational history, so relationships before that one. Then that allows us to really see the traumas that that person has experienced, the beliefs that they've developed in their lives, their the messages they've received about infidelity, all of those things. Then we go into their own relation, like the couple's relational history, and that through that we can really get a deeper understanding of like what went wrong here, what was happening, how did we, how did the relationship get to this point. um and so I think that's so important to go through all those pieces so you can really understand. Otherwise, it's really hard to make sense of it. And once we get that, and then we go through the whole story of the infidelity, ask the question. Um, and then the next step is to really acknowledge the impact that the infidelity has had on your partner. And we go through and what was that like? How did that impact them as an individual? How did that impact them in terms of your relationship? How did that impact how they see the world? How did that impact how they are as a parent? How they operate with their friends? How their trust is with everyone else in their life? And really, really recognizing, rather than I see that I hurt you, I'm sorry, right? Like going deep into that and acknowledging how hurtful this was until somebody gets that real validation and empathy. It's going to be hard for them to believe or develop any kind of trust or confidence that it won't happen again, because without that, when they can demonstrate, I understand the hurt this has caused, you have every right to feel this way, that gives often a more confident that, well, if you get now how bad this hurt me, then I can trust a little bit more that maybe you won't do this. The next step is developing a plan how to keep this from happening again.
Have
But
you
I think
have you I'm sorry, have you found that there's a common theme as to the cause of infidelity, or is it all over the board?
um, it's a lot of times resentment's a huge piece there, right? And just kind of not having the tools to communicate through however many years of their relationship, um, to really talk about how this is what's bothering me. How can we improve this? And so they're just kind of going on without resolving these problems, these issues. And eventually that just pulls them further and further and further apart. And so a lot of times that's a piece of it, not all the time. So again, that goes back to having the tools. So when we work with something like that, part of that plan going forward is just developing the tools on how to handle these conversations going forward. Sometimes people want to plan for every potential scenario in the future that could happen, but that's not really realistic. And so I try to tell them, we don't have to do that if you just once you have the tools and capability to talk about these things, anything can come up, and you guys will have the ability to kind of bring it up, have those conversations, problem solve, do all that kind of stuff.
Well, and I want to go into an entirely different area now because you talked about some of the specialized training you have. And when we get into deep trauma, PTSD and other really deep traumas that people have experienced in their childhood or early life or even early adult life, you use something called EMDR,
Yeah.
which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And, I've heard of that. I find it fascinating. But what is it and how on earth does that actually help someone to work through this trauma? Because it seems like it's such a simple thing, and yet it has to be very well understood.
Yeah. So, what EMDR is really, it's bilateral stimulation. So even though it's called eye movement desensitization reprocessing, sometimes, that can be done with like tapping or any kind of like right to left movement. That's what bilateral stimulation is. And so the way it works is we have to go again to that deeper belief that you have and go back to your earlier experiences where you've had that, right? And so if somebody, first, we'll talk about, for instance, like a single incident trauma, if somebody maybe was assaulted by something like that. And oftentimes an earlier belief that they had will get reinforced by that trauma. Sometimes it creates a new belief. But so if that created a belief that there's something wrong with me, right? I'm going to ask, what was the first memory you have of having that same feeling that there's something wrong with me? And so we've kind of got to start there to clear it all the way out. Because if we only focus on this single incident, they're still going to have that belief, right? So trauma is not necessarily what happened, but it's the belief that created inside of you. So you need to target the belief, not necessarily the incident. And so there's a whole process, obviously, but we have people kind of focus on that memory while we do that bilateral stimulation, and that eventually can desensitize it. So when you experience a trauma, it gets stored in the wrong part of your brain. And with the bilateral stimulation, we can move it and put it into the right place in your brain. So that will desensitize it. So you're not having triggers. That'll kind of, that will tell me if it's desensitized or not, right? Then not experiencing the trigger. And then the reprocessing is taking that belief and changing it into a more positive belief. So, it can be anything, but a lot of times it's opposite or close to opposite of that, but reasonable. So, if there's something wrong with me was the belief, then we might try to reprocess. There's nothing, I'm not damaged, or I'm worthy of love, or something that will be different, opposite of that, and change that belief that they're living with. But we're not going to be able to change that belief if we still have that earlier root memory of that. And so that's why we kind of have to start at the beginning and move forward.
So as you do that, and I understand exactly what you're saying, and it's done through NLP, it's done through hypnosis, it's done through all ways. You're doing it in a very specific way. But how does the bilateral stimulation, me moving my eyes from right to left to right to left, or you tapping or me tapping right shoulder, left shoulder, or listening to music that's bilateral music, how on earth does that change something subconsciously, number one? And number two, and I think this is really important because I studied this a bit before the interview, there are certain things we can do on our own. I can sit and listen to bilateral movement or music or tap and so forth, but that's not necessarily going to help me if I've had deep trauma. I need a therapist who's been trained to take me through that process. So, but how does the bilateral thing even work? It just sounds so simple.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Somehow when you're moving it from right to left, it allows it allows that memory to move into the right place. I don't have all the science down, but it has that ability. And then in addition to that, though, so when you experience a trauma, and so if you experience an assault on the street and a blue car drives by, going forward, a blue car might be a trigger. And when somebody sees a blue car, they might have some kind of trauma response. Well, that's called confirming information. So every time that happens, it confirms to your brain, this is scary, this is dangerous, this is a bad this is bad, right? This is our trigger. And so you keep reinforcing that in your brain. But when you have an experience different from that, especially with a compassionate therapist, you're in a safe scenario, you're like, it's very different than the scenario you had during the trauma. This is disconfirming information. And so you are doing the bilateral stimulation while you're focusing on that memory with all of this disconfirming information. And so that's disconnecting the wires.
So anyone who's really experienced deep trauma, and what would you say that would be? You've got obviously your assaults, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, physical, whatever that happens to be. You've got PTSD, so you've got these wonderful people coming back from conflict that have developed major PTSD. What would you say are the common things that people, if they're experiencing this, need to come see a licensed therapist such as you rather than trying to fix it on their own?
I think definitely any kind of assault, like you said, complex trauma, which is repeated abuse, repeated childhood abuse, usually at the hands of a primary caregiver, that's going to be really kind of deep into all different kinds of, it kind of seeps into all different places of your brain, of your life, your relationships, all of that. Witnessing any kind of maybe witnessing a car accident, or witnessing somebody get hurt, or a military somebody who is in combat, maybe, right? Seeing anyone hurt, whether it's a partner, somebody else, kind of that they're in a team with. But I think any kind of witness to something like that, anything that really resulted in like your brain at some point feeling like it couldn't tolerate what you were experiencing, or feeling any kind of situation that at that time felt life-threatening, whether it actually was or not, that should definitely be done with a licensed professional.
Right.
But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I think that's so important for people to understand that, there's a lot of help for a lot of reasons with subconscious challenges and so forth and childhood difficulties. But when you get to that point, you really need that licensed therapist to help you. Even though other people say, oh, yeah, I can help you, the reality is you need someone with your type of expertise to do that. The reason I interrupt you is because we're getting short on time here, so I apologize for that. But
Yeah.
going back to relationships now, as we're closing up, what would be the message that you'd like to share with the audience about relationships?
So often people get so discouraged with or even hopeless about their relationship, thinking this can't be saved. This is kind of, we're not going to make it. But so many times it's totally fixable, whether you get that help with therapy, with, reading books, doing online courses, doing, virtual trainings or lectures, anything like that. But kind of, I want people to have hope that it's a lot of things are fixable. It just, you need the tools, because really people sometimes get so discouraged and hopeless. And so to really give it try to use those tools, try to develop those tools and see what happens.
Great. Kayla, thanks so much. The thing that fascinates me is here we are having this great conversation, and time has gone by so quickly.
I love
So,
talking about relationships.
how do people find you? How do people find you if they are looking for your help?
Yeah, my website is southdenvertherapy.com, and also the name of my practice. Also on Instagram, Facebook, you can find me on South Denver Therapy.
Okay, and for trauma, they have to be in the state of California
They have to, Colorado, they need to be
or
actually
Colorado.
located in there. So they don't have to live there, but in order to do the work, they need to be at that time located in Colorado.
Now, that's for trauma, or is that for relationship
That's for therapy, any kind of
therapy?
therapy, especially including any kind of trauma, right? If
Okay,
they're looking for tools and general conflict resolution kind of stuff, that's where some coaching could come in kind of anywhere in the world. But to do some deep trauma work or deep therapy, they need to be at the time of treatment located in the state of Colorado.
great. Hey, thank you so much. And I think what impresses me most was the very first question I asked you. Why on earth are you doing a podcast when
Mhm.
it's you haven't written a book, or maybe you have, but we're not trying to promote anything. You're just here to help people. And I just want to give you kudos for that you were just here to help people, and anything that we can talk about might lead them to either seek your help, or if they're not in the state of, Colorado, they can seek a licensed qualified therapist to get some help.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for
So
having
thank
me.
you. Thank you. Folks, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. And as usual, my goodbye is namaste.